Our third and final reader of the trio is Dawn Macdonald. Dawn Macdonald lives in Whitehorse, Yukon, where she grew up in a cabin down a dirt road without electricity or running water. She studied applied mathematics and physics at university and went to her scholarship interview wearing shoes she had found at the dump. Anyone who's lived rural knows there's always cool stuff at the dump. Her summer student projects in space physics involved numerical modeling of the northern lights. Her debut collection, Northerny, is fresh, funny, and imbued with infectious energy. In it, Dawn tells a much-needed and compelling story of growing up and living in the North. Jeremy Pataki, author of Overwinter, tells us, in Northerny, Dawn Macdonald tempers a poetic soulfulness with a comic sense for absurdity and punch. These poems speak with smart humor and wit, linguistic delight, and honest observations spiked with confession. Dawn hopes that a person reading her book in Toronto will text a friend, "Poetry book just made me lol." So anyone who's listening in Toronto, please, we are expecting this. And at the same time, we'll read to the end and come to know a different North. Dawn, please go ahead and turn on your audio.
Thank you, Rob. I'd like to acknowledge that I am sitting here in the traditional territories of the Kwanlundun First Nation and the Taanquatchon Council, and the poems in the book were also written in and shaped by the lands of the Carcross-Tagish First Nation, Champagne and Ajax First Nations, and the Kluane First Nation. And as Rob said in the introduction, I was born in Whitehorse, Yukon. I was born in a hospital. I was not born in a log cabin, but I did grow up in a cabin, although calling it a cabin is maybe a little bit generous. It was more like a conglomeration of cabins and shacks that had been kind of piled on top of each other. And, I think the difference between a cabin or a shack and a house is the absence of building codes. And that's the place that I grew up in, is a place where, building codes are a little bit arbitrary. Codes in general are a little bit arbitrary. So, my dad had this story about this buddy of his that had his cabin ready to get wired up to the grid. And, he's got all the wiring in, brings the inspector out. They're standing there looking at the fuse box, and the inspector's like, well, the bottom edge of the fuse box needs to be this many inches from the floor, and the top edge needs to be this many inches from the ceiling. And they're looking at the box, they're looking at the ceiling, which is about this high, and there's just not room for this to happen. So Buddy pulls the box out of the wall, flips it around, pops it back in. Bottom edge is now at the top, top edge is now at the bottom. Looks at the inspector looks at him, looks at the box, says, yeah, we're good, signs off. And, I like to think that my poetry is in some ways a little bit like that fuse box. It might not be done right, might not always be up to code, but hopefully with a little sense of humor, we're going to make it work. So my book is called Northerny, and that's a bit of a joke. Growing up here, we see a lot of this northerny type of art, and it can feel really boring. And it's very strange that this art that's supposedly for you or about you is just so boring to you. But over time, I started to realize, this is the thing, is it really isn't for us, and it isn't about us. What this northerny art often is more of the southern view of what the North looks like to someone who's coming up here and experiencing it, as a place set against other places. And, we are more like the quaint locals in the story, like the story I just told you. So my book sort of deals with those tensions and dislocations of being from a place that is so often mythologized as a destination for adventure and for self-discovery. Now, one of the things that you have to do to be northerny is you have to write a nature poem. So I'm going to start off with a poem called The Kingfisher. And, that's a classic title. There is a poem by Charles Olson called The Kingfisher. There's a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins that's about a kingfisher. So I wanted to try to talk about the kingfisher. And as an aside, I will tell you that I went back and forth a lot with the editor, thank you, Janny, over the inconsistent capitalization in this poem. But you will not be able to hear the case distinctions while I'm reading, so hopefully this is going to go all right. The Kingfisher. What's a kingfisher, precious? Just a bird with a great name, a flop and mop with a marketing department. We have sandpipers, robins, Turdus migratorius, the chipping sparrow, Wilson's warbler, hoary, or common redpoll. These are easily confused, but anyone would rather see the hoary. We have birds, the eagle, the raven, the bank and cliff swallows, the chickadee dee 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 dee. A year ago, I didn't know the names to our birds. My husband, named Husband, and I, named I. We bought Audubons. We bought Petersons. I acquired a 1936 American Birds. I gained access to a comprehensive database called Birds of the World. Some birds migrate. Some birds stay. Some birds tell you what time it is. Others what month, with climate-altered slippage. Some birds are out of their recorded range. Migration may be just each bird trying to get a little elbow room from its fellow birds and taken to its logical conclusion. There's a similar drift and pull in political opinion, not among birds. The study of birds conduces to analogy. The amateur bird watcher may be distinguished by his eccentricity of dress and his unconstrained attitudes. The expert wears earth tones and blends into the printed page. The amateur knows not the names of things and calls them all, "Hey, you." Only the owl responds to this gambit. The kingfisher is a poem. The bird is a fluttering leaf among leaves. The kingfisher does not come into these parts. The second poem that I will read also has a bird in it, and this poem is called Chit Chat. I mean, auto-plagiarism is obviously the only possibility for any internally consistent, integral individual. I mean, how many times do you tell that story? Gonna sue you at the dinner table, gonna report you to the Conversation Board Association Committee where you can go with your broad appeal. I mean, there's this grouse that runs through all my poems. Struts, showing tail. How many times I tell that story about my father, about nature's packaged food. And guess what, mofo? All of y'all and us are nature's packaged food. Could eat you up. Anyway, grouse keeps butting in where not especially called for. Upsets the cup. Look, look, says grouse. Look, 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 look. I'm not a story. I'm a I'm. I'm not even a self. Now, my third poem is about the outhouse, and there's a couple of poems in the book about the outhouse. You know, I have mixed feelings. In some ways, sometimes I kind of miss the outhouse, but it has its pros and cons, and there were some issues in particular during the time that I have called WASP summer. Like us, the wasps made paper to package pain. They hung their sting-centric disco ball from the roofline of the outhouse. We tried to blend our lives. Our shit, their venom. We leveraged a can of old spray paint in the rearguard action. Neon green wasps lumped the walls. Like us, wasps stop moving if their respiratory systems are impaired. These functions cross the phyla: respiration, digestion, excretion, reproduction, habitat selection, and modification. The outhouse kept our shit away from home. Some people have no manners and no sense. Move in on your shit, punish you for coming back and making more. The wasp decor will likely not catch on. The paint is remnant of that summer's war. Splotches are ugliness to us, death to the other. We cannot live together. We put it on paper and do not feel better. The sting connects us, haunch to haunch. All right, my next poem is not so northerny. This one is, but yeah, it's not so northerny. It's called 5 Ways of Shutting Up. Do you like our sexual dimorphism, I ask. He likes the way I fit into his armpit. Inside the pit of the peach is a soft thing and bitter, a tongue out of the mouth. Loose lips sink ships. Sunk ships drip drops. Dropped drips plink plonk. Plonked plinks, clog sinks. Deep morning is a velvet box, and I a dull jewel, snug within. The lid is prized up from the horizon. Some hand will wear this ring. Like a telescope, like a lawn chair, like a freezer door, like a coffin top, like a conibear. Gulped down a gumball from the 25-cent machine. Kids say if you eat one, it'll swell in your guts and kill you. You're gonna die, kid. And finally, I'd like to finish off with a poem called First Things. This doesn't have to go in order. That's the first thing. I looked inside an egg, poked and blown pristine, made clean by the passing of its own slime. Inside was a cathedral, upturned chalice, clean as my own eye. A hole is a thing to gather light. The sun's blown its particles apart in order to glow through this one dead egg. This doesn't have to go in order. Crack, then slime, or slime first, then the egg. Hole in your hand, blown glass, a trinket, a gift, a thing readily given, riddle wrapped up inside, cased, laid, brooded, clucked upon, clean as a whistle. An egg's a thing with feathers, but order of operations applies. A flashlight shone clean through the inside, illuminates outline, diagram, edges blown. A real chicken nugget, down over bone, clean tucked tail and rolled. Egg over easy. It looks easy. Asleep, unblown. No peep nor crack. First things first. All in order, round inside. I once saw a bird born inside out, heart pumping on down chest. A thing that lived in egg, but once born, died, thrown and blown away. To the white bowl of the sink I went to clean my hands after. Last things follow first. Hygiene, order. Thank you.